What's up guys, welcome to part 2 of the 8-bit taillight build. Back in part 1 we focused a lot more on the design process and the CAD process of how I modeled out the taillight using some 3D scans that I was able to get from a few parts of the bike. Part 2 is going to be a lot more focused on the physical build of the taillight. You'll see me 3D printing some parts to make sure that the geometry is absolutely dialed before I end up getting the parts machined out of aluminum. You'll see me firing up the PCB board over on my desk to make sure that the animations are going through properly, and then bringing those together and getting them installed on the bike. So a lot to cover in this video. Hope you guys enjoy. I want to quickly recap the different parts of the taillight. First, there's the diffuser where the LED projections are going to be displayed. Then there is the reflector, which is going to help the light reflect and become brighter before it hits the diffuser. Next is the PCB, which is essentially the motherboard and the place where all the LEDs and the electronics will be living. And lastly, there is the enclosure. One of the major design drivers for this project was making sure that the taillight was a plug-and-play installation. I want the light to be able to be installed the same way the OEM taillight is installed, and I want the connectors to match up to the OEM connectors. After a few changes to the CAD model, I felt comfortable moving ahead with purchasing the CNC taillight. It took some time, but when the PCBs had finally arrived, they looked great. All the electronics and controlling features were on the back, and on the front were all the LEDs. To keep things moving quickly, I simply used the soldering pads that were on the back of the PCB to connect the PCB back to the bike's wiring harness. This is a temporary solution, but as I look further into the future, I'd like to replace these soldering pads with a connector. An important feature for me to call out here is the fact that I'll be using a button that is wired into the PCB's harness to be able to control the different animations. So by simply clicking that button once, you'll be able to cycle through all the different animations. And by holding the button for about a second, you'll be able to select the new animation. After a few weeks of production, the aluminum taillight arrived in the mail and it looked great. I love the way that the logo ended up coming out on the side of the light. The edges were softened after the production, making sure that the edges were sharp, but not too sharp. I also compared the weight of the CNC part with the Moto Dynamics taillight to see where I was falling, and at this point we were still lighter than the Moto Dynamics taillight, so once we added a few more components we would be a little bit closer to that weight or maybe a little bit over, but that's fine. By the time the CNC enclosure had arrived, the diffuser, the reflector, and the PCB were already in my possession. And so I got right to work assembling the taillight and getting everything where it needed to be so that I could get it down to the bike. Now that the taillight was actually built and it was in its final material of aluminum, it was a huge checkpoint in this project. Starting all the way back from it just being a sketch to then being 3D printed and doing all the 3D scanning, but finally having that CNC part in my hands was so sweet. But now it's time to get it on the bike, and that's where things get really interesting. One of the features that I wanted to include in the taillight was the ability to have a looping feature. So that's what's happening here. The taillight is simply looping all the animations to get some cool videos, and when I show this off at different motorcycle shows, people can see all the animations flowing. After all the work that it took to get this taillight to be where it is today, it was so rewarding to see it on the back of that bike going through the animations. I mean, getting the surfaces to match up with the surfaces from that complex Triumph fairing was like a month of work alone just to get things to look right. So the plan is still to get that part anodized and to make it really pop at the back of the bike and really contrast the bright red pixels coming through it. So I'll likely make another video of that in the near term or in the near future. So for now, I would love to hear from you guys. What is it that you want to see me build next? And if you like these videos of me going super in depth on the way that I knock these things out. Until then, I'll catch you guys later.